Well, we are in the final stretch. We're not standing between anyone and cocktails, so we can have a nice conversation. First of all, thank you for joining us for the afternoon. I thought I would set a little context. Those of you who were here with us last year, we had Brian Moynihan sitting in this seat, and this part of the story may sound a little familiar, but I think it really matters. The context. Charlie and I have been friends for almost 20 years. We both went to Johns Hopkins, served on the Johns Hopkins board. And the reason that's, I think, relevant for this conversation is that it predicts or predicates the basis of a relationship that is yielding a lot of fruit for BEA and for the agenda that we care about. And we will talk a little bit about the role that Wells Fargo has played with a lot of gratitude for what you and Wells have done. But before we get to that part, let's talk a little bit about, although you and I have known each other for a long, long time, your journey with this topic of diversity and a commitment to diversity probably came later in at least our friendship. Charlie was invited to an event called the Black Corporate Directors Conference, which we all know our good friend Melody Hobson, along with Russell Reynolds and Deloitte, puts together every year. It's all of the black corporate directors in America are invited and are included. And Charlie, as the CEO of BNY Mellon, got an invitation to do that. So I thought, and I remember, because Robin and I were in the audience, and you and Amy was there, and you were invited. But unlike most speakers at that conference, you stayed for 2 days after your commitment. So talk a little bit about that, because I think as we've compared notes, that was really one of your first substantive, really up-close experiences with the topic.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. I started the whole process of leading up to that meeting was we had one of our directors, Sam Scott, was a member of that group, and we were having a conversation about increasing the diversity of our board. It was actually, quite honestly, a very narrow discussion that we were having, and said, this is, it's a great group of people, but actually, more importantly, I think if you come there, if you're actually willing to put some time in and stay, I think you'll actually, he just kind of said, you'll learn a lot, and he left it very, very generic like that. Probably having a great deal of understanding of exactly what he meant by that and what I could get out of it. And so I went and I was interviewed by Melody, and Melody said, for those of you that know her, is no ground rules, going to ask whatever I want. It's going to be tough because we've got to get to the honest answers, not the not the stuff people generally like to say. That in itself is, it's a little bit of a humbling experience because you don't control the dialogue, but it's incredibly important to be able to talk about what we've done well, haven't done well, how we think about things, and that created a series of ideas both leading up to that and getting into that mindset, but also having the conversation with her. I actually think what was actually far more, not more impactful, but it was just impactful in a very different way, was the time I spent listening to the members of the council who would come up and be in chats with each other, talking about their own experiences, their own lives, what they had to go through. And Tony knows this, but I grew up in what I thought was a very nice, normal suburb out in New Jersey.
You got to tell them where it is now.
Westfield, New Jersey.
Nice and normal, okay.
To me, it was just, that was home. That was just kind of what normal was. And then as I got out of Westfield, went to college, and then got into the work world, you realize it's just not what this country is, even though that's kind of all you know. And I actually looked the other day just at the diversity of Westfield, and it's 2% black today, which is probably much higher than it was when I lived there. But I didn't think of it that way. Because it's just, you know what you know. So when you live that kind of life and you live that kind of existence, even though as you get into the world and you start realizing just how the lack of diversity, whether it's in communities, whether it's in companies, what what that actually means and what's being missed relative to allowing people to live their lives to the fullest and be able to be represented in a way that gets the best contributions out there. It became very personal when you sat and listened to other people's stories. And again, the things that I had heard, I never heard ever before, never even thought to ask.
And by this time, you had been CEO at Visa.
Yes.
You'd been a senior executive at JP Morgan. And I think this meeting was 2015, 16, 17, somewhere around there.
It was probably 2018.
Right. So you're a poster child for, I think, how so many people make it to the C-suite without ever having that up close and personal.
But the thing, can I just, what was impactful, so I heard these stories of what people have gone through in their lives. I would never think to go out running without my driver's license, because when I'm stopped by the police, I have to have it. Or the kinds of conversations they have to prepare their kids for. Again, things that, again, when you live the life that I lived, even leading up to that point, I'd never heard those conversations. Right? We were friends. We had never had conversations like that. It wasn't a place that I had ever gone to in a conversation. And then I go back to my job at BNY. And it's, there was a woman who unfortunately, very sad, has since passed away, Paulette Wright, who's African-American, and you sit and have the conversation about, this is what I heard. Can you tell me a little bit about your life? And it reinforced it in an even more personal way. And then you talk to other people, reinforces it more a personal way. We connected at that point in time. And so it changes, it takes the concepts of when people talk about believing in diversity and why it's important, and personalizes it in a way where, for those of us that haven't lived our lives that way, you get a totally different perspective on what other people have gone through, what it's taken them to get to the point in life where they are, but also as a leader, what I should be doing differently to try and both make sure as many people feel what I felt at that point in time, but then also do things differently than just kind of the generic DE&I programs that we all have witnessed that had very little impact over a long time.
So this conversation may be a little uncomfortable, and Charlie has said nothing's off limits, but I think there's an era, after BNY Mellon, you go in 2019 to become the CEO of Wells Fargo, and you arrive at Wells Fargo, and there's a bit of the pre-Charlie Scharf era of things you inherited at Wells, which we've all read about in the press, and the post-Charlie Scharf era. So it probably isn't useful to go back deeply onto the pre-Charlie Scharf, because you inherited these things, you cleaned some of that stuff up. But talk a little bit about what I'll call the infamous memo.
Yes.
And I think that was really an important point in this evolution.
Yeah. It was, I don't remember the exact timing, I think it was after the murder of George Floyd. And when I first had gotten to Wells, it's just partially because of our past, but also partially because of the things that I had learned that I believed in. I tried to make it clear when I first arrived, even with all the things I had to do, why I thought these diversity efforts were so important, and that we had to change the dialogue from just talking generically about programs and why they're important to what we actually want to get out of it and how we're going to judge ourselves. And then when the murder of George Floyd happened, I wanted to send a note to the company, and I wanted to lay out some very specific things that we as a company were going to do, that we should, that could be a template to actually judge us on, which, and one of those things related to senior level representation. And everyone in jobs like mine generally talks about representation as something that's important, but they never actually talk about the senior-most people that you're responsible for. It's always what the rest of the company's going to do. And I had hired some people that were white, and I had heard some criticism inside the company for it, and I wanted to address it. And the people who read these memos before they go out said, don't do that. Don't do that. And in hindsight, they were probably right, but not for that exact reason. So I wrote something which I still believe in today, which was, we were going through a period of, we had a lot of work that had to get done, and we needed people who had the experience that have done this. Our regulators wanted us to hire people who had done this before at other institutions. And so what I wrote was that, I forget the exact words, but it was something to the effect of, the sad truth is that there is not black talent at large banks that are in these roles, that have done these jobs, sitting at the senior most levels of the companies, because banks have done a poor job of promoting people through the ranks and are not representative of the country. And Reuters picked up that I said...
This was an internal memo.
This is an internal memo.
To set the stage, right.
And it was a little bit more eloquent than what I just said. But Reuters then picked up that Scharf says there's not black talent to hire from, which is not, and I was actually trying to make the other point, which is they're actually, because I then go on to say, but there is a huge amount of black talent out there that we're going to make sure that we promote people up through the ranks, and we're going to hire from the outside as well, so that we don't look like banks look like today, that we look differently. So they picked that up, and you can just imagine what the swell was. And I remember getting the call. It was something like 5:30 in the morning. It was during COVID. I remember exactly where I was, and someone said, "Oh, this was picked up, and it's through social media, and you have to apologize." I said, "Well, I shouldn't have to apologize. I didn't say what was said." And I'm still conflicted to this day, because I did send out an apology. And on the one hand, it kind of broke the news cycle of, it became I apologize for the next day. And then the mass media kind of left it behind. So, the PR folks feel very good about themselves. And I'm sitting here, and I tell them to this day, like, you all feel great about yourselves, and I have to live with the fact that people think I'm a racist. And it's just a very hard thing to deal with. So that's the personal side of it. The other side of that is, the good that came out of that is it prompted a bunch of discussions, both I think inside the company and outside the company, which is, okay, whether I said that or not doesn't matter. Because what became very, very clear is whether I said it or didn't say it, there are a lot of people that believe it. And there are a lot of people inside the company that know that a lot of people believe that. And so it was an opportunity to allow people inside the company to voice their frustration, to say what they thought, to ask questions around it, and then turn the conversation to, okay, let's force other people in the company to learn about what it's like to be in the minority, to tell some of these stories so people can understand exactly what it is. It's not something theoretical. And then let's talk about what do we have to do differently.
So this, I think, is a really important story, because we started with your personal journey in the topic of diversity in corporate America. And then you have this well-intended note that goes out. It gets received in the way you've just described. And if the story ended there, it would all be fine, because there was learning inside. But then there was in 2020, the Department of Labor settlement for $8 million for a group of individuals who thought that Wells was discriminating against black job applicants. There was a little bit of a whistleblower in 2022 for the prospect that there were sham interviews being conducted of black candidates who would never get the job because someone had already been selected. So you're sitting in the middle of all of this, and ultimately this conversation is about the corporate commitment to DEI, which makes what you do and what you're committed to even harder today. So talk a little bit about working through those points at Wells, but more importantly, where we stand today and where you stand today as you lead Wells in this current environment.
Sure. Yeah, I think, listen, not to retread the history of the company, but I think after we made all the mistakes that we made, one of the worst mistakes that we made was we were unwilling to be objective about looking at our actions and to say, here's what we think we did right, here's what we think we did wrong, here's what we're going to do about it. Everything that whenever someone wrote a story about us or said we did something wrong, we were always very, very defensive about it. And so even if there wasn't truth in all those things, there was enough truth in how all those things fit together that that there was a lot that we should have and could have learned. And so we also lost the trust of people who were looking at it and saying, hey, at some point, you do have to step back, and again, there has to be truth there. And so what I've tried to do since I've been there is, when something comes up, whether it's something that happened during my tenure or prior, is to ask that question objectively. Not to, you read something and your first reaction can be, oh, that can't be true. Okay, now let's put that reaction aside and let's go try and figure out what are actually the facts. And so these, the interviews are actually a very good example, which is one of the things that in that memo that I said we were going to do is we were going to require when interviews of people over a certain level happened, that they were going to have to include a diverse set of candidates, and it was going to have to be a diverse group of interviewers. And I don't have to go through all the reasons why we thought that was the right thing to do. Then someone leaves the company very unhappily for a reason and said, I was involved in interviews where we interviewed people that were diverse but never had a chance.
Along in the line of the Rooney Rule,
yes,
for instance. So add black applicants to the slate.
Absolutely.
And the charge was that they were added, but the job had already been promised to a white candidate.
Correct. And so, listen, my first reaction to that is, first of all, it's unfortunate because there's no question that something like the Rooney Rule makes tremendous sense. The fact is, when you looked at who we were interviewing people that looked like the people that were hiring them, which were not representative of the great talent that was available. And we also know that when you do bring in diverse people to interview, people want to see people that look like themselves. But in order to have the right kind of conversation about the candidates, is you want diverse people having that conversation. You don't want to have, the white men who are only looking for the qualities that they generally see in white men. You want to change that kind of conversation. So, theoretically, that all made sense. But the question is, did we make errors in terms of how that was implemented?
Now, because I do want to come to this particular moment, but this is probably a good point to inject. It was right around this time, 2020 or 2021, that we approached Wells to be the anchor sponsor for the Black Entrepreneurs Fund. Melissa Bradley, whom you just met on the panel here, is the director of that particular fund that Wells has anchored. It's a $50 million fund. You guys gave $20 million towards the support of that fund, for which we're grateful and which was a huge thing. Is there space for making those kinds of commitments today in the current climate for DEI? Because it's under attack. The Fearless Fund is being sued. Where are you, and what will you do differently or the same at Wells?
Well, I think, so short answer is absolutely there should be. And we confront this, head on, both internally and externally, because, I'm in Washington. One of my coworkers, Sanders, is here somewhere. There he is. I get it from, the right side of the aisle. We're woke. We're doing things, to cater to the left. They're not business focused, and I just tell them that's just not true. It is just categorically not true. What we're interested in doing is internally, we want to make sure that we have the best people, and in order to have the best people, there's no reason why they shouldn't be representative of what this country looks like, and that's not what most companies look like. And so yes, we are doing things to ensure that we're talking to and approaching a much broader set of people than we would have in the past, and I'm not ashamed of that. It's just the opposite. There's no question it's the right thing to do. When we look at our businesses and we look at who we serve, our customer base doesn't look like the country. And it's upon us, just from a business standpoint, to make sure that we're serving as broad a group of people as we possibly can. And that's not political. That's actually just the right and the best thing to do if you're sitting in my chair. And so we're always going to make sure that we're following the law. And it doesn't matter whether you're on the left or on the right. There are always things that people are going to be looking at us to say, are you doing this, are you doing that? And he's stepping over the line. But the business reasons to do what we're doing are as factual today as they were when we said we were going to do these. In fact, when we go through the conversation internally, we have these councils that meet. We just had them last week with the different underrepresented groups in the country. And I proactively say, listen, I'm sure this is on your mind, Because here's what I hear when I have to go to DC and have these conversations, but we're not changing our approach. There's no reason why we should change what we have to do. And I will say, one of the things which is the most difficult thing in all this is, I mean, these are hard issues to deal with. As you know, we've made mistakes along our journey, and it's very easy to sit there and say, it's just easy. It's just too hard. I'm going to crawl under the rock. Let someone else be out front and to try and make progress and then show it. But that'd just be the wrong thing to do. And so you do have to, both as an individual, but as a senior team and our entire company and our board, we talk about it. We talk about what the risks are. And again, just from as a leader, as a person, and from a business perspective, there's no question in my mind that the principles with which we set out when we created the things that we're doing are all valid today.
It goes without saying that this takes courage. It's unfortunate that it does take courage to do the things and double down on the things that you're doing. But what's very clear is that leadership makes all the difference. And I appreciate, as a friend and as someone who is leading one of the most important businesses in the country, your leadership on this area and your commitment to the Black Entrepreneurs Fund and everything that we're trying to get done. So I think keep doing what you're doing. Because it's a great example to hold others up, and the road will be imperfect, as I think your story tells, but it's the continued and sustained leadership commitment. So I'll give you the last word with anything you'd like to offer.
Listen, I think the last thing I would say is I have learned a tremendous amount from my friends, unfortunately, when we go through the difficult conversations, and so I would just encourage everyone to have the kinds of conversations that are hard with the people that need to hear them, not just the people who you're comfortable having them with. And so, on my, whether, for myself, whether it was at Bank of New York and then at Wells Fargo, proactively find ways to have the non-diverse folks in our management team talk to people that have had a different experience, to understand what their life has been and the way they're thinking about what we can do differently. But the more proactively people can approach that from both sides, I think the better off we'll be.
Good. Well, please join me in thanking Charlie Scharf.